Welcome to our Championing Students Through Change, welcoming youth transition to and from school. It's a lot of words for this three-part series. Today's session is creating a culture of warmth and welcome through planned and abrupt transition. I do want to say this disclaimer that the ideas and perspectives and experience shared in today's panel are that of our projects and our panelists and not endorsed necessarily by SAMHSA. So today's session is really that is how are we welcoming our young folks back from the weekend, from the evening, from one period to the other, and then also how are we welcoming them back from abrupt and unplanned times away from our school community. There are values, right, and ways of being that can really support a young person in feeling a sense of belonging and safety and welcome. Session 2, which is tomorrow, Wednesday, is focusing on how we might support young folks and their families or their networks of support upon return from hospitalization. That is a very unique experience with an incredible set of needs and things to be mindful of. And so that's what tomorrow's session will center. And then Thursday's session, our session 3, is supporting students with reentry to school after juvenile justice involvement or touches with law enforcement or the carceral system. So I just want to say briefly, this three-part series, a lot of real beautiful love and thought has gone into creating it. So I just want to uplift Melissa Smith and Amanda Lip, who are part of this incredible team. And we will be working with them and with us, the three of us, I think, in different ways throughout the course of this three-part series.
I'm sure many of us, are both practitioners of trauma-informed care, but also healing-centered engagement. With that being said, it's really that understanding healing-centered engagement and trauma-informed care, it requires us to constantly check in. It requires us to constantly calibrate, to reflect and reconfigure, and that can be exhausting. But if we really want the benefit of inclusive supportive climates and cultures, it's going to be important that we do that work within so that we can support the environments around us. I want you to consider where you welcome young people back into your school community. Where do you welcome them? What areas, what places? And then also consider what are some reasons a young person might be returning. Oriana mentioned in the beginning, summer break, summertime off. That's one. What are some other reasons why a young person might be entering back into a learning environment? So in the chat, I'd love for you to reflect on these kind of two questions. Where are the spaces that you welcome students back and young people back? Classroom? I don't want to give you all the thoughts I have because you have tons, I'm sure. But where are those spaces? And then what are some reasons that you can think of or even you've experienced with young people while they're returning back? Migrant students who leave school to go to work. Yes, death of a loved one. Student enters, they come into the front office. That's a place where they enter. Yes. They enter into the entry door. They enter the cafeteria. They enter the hallway. They enter the intervention rooms. They enter the bathrooms. They enter the gym. If we slow down and really think, they're entering into the school environment as a whole, but they're actually entering into multiple environments that may have many different climates. And how are they having to adjust to those different climates as they enter back into that learning environment? So, as we think about this, just think about what is the experience of a student that's been absent and they have to now come back into an environment affected in some way because they were absent for a reason. Even if it was summer, that was a reason. So they were absent. And what might they need to heal or process or even get back involved in the experiences and the culture, the school community and the school culture? Next slide. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna do a quick activity, and I'd like to introduce you to an idea called collective journal. So a collective journal is a place where we can all share our thoughts, we can share our reflections, we can share our insights, and it's all in one shared document. So in a moment, there's going to be a link. There it is. Tech Host is amazing. In the chat, I invite you to click on that link. We're not going to spend too much time in the collective journal because we could spend quite a bit of time as we start to think and understand what other people's experiences are. But what I'd like you to do is think about the questions that are posed. What have my students or your students experienced in their absence? How have those experiences settled with them? What are the type of things that have happened to and with students as they've been absent from the learning environment? What are things they've told you? What are things that you know? How are they dealing with that? How are they dealing with the transition back? Whether it's from going to the office to talk to a parent and then coming back, whether it's going to a reading group, coming back, whether, any kind of absence may or may not have an impact on students. And then lastly, what might they need to process and heal as we're integrating, as we're helping the student, as we're helping their families and caregivers, as we're helping them integrate back into the campus? What might they need? And so the collective journal, I will give you kind of a little note. There are times when people start engaging with the collective journal and they're like, I'm never doing this again. And that's because we're all in it. That's the collective part of it. So it's a great thing. It's a strength, and it also can be a bit annoying, but I'm going to encourage you to lean into it. You just find a blank place on the Google Doc, and you just journal, you chat, you write your thoughts down. And right now we're just kind of thinking, like, still pulling up those ideas, still kind of building a foundation. What are some of those experiences, and how might they be processing? We don't know. We're not necessarily in their brain, but what's been shared with you? And then, how have you helped to integrate students back into the space? What are some intentional, specific moves that you've made to support students and their families? So there's several different ways to look at this, and I encourage you, whatever is coming to your mind as I speak, I encourage you to share that with us in the collective journal. So I'll pause for a moment and just give you some time to maybe generate a sentence or two in the collective journal. But I am going to encourage you to save the link, because it's something you can refer back to as you continue to develop your ideas and your thoughts around this warmth and welcoming environment and students leaving and entering school. All right, so on the next slide, again, thank you for engaging in that. And I would love for this to be something that you can revisit and just continue to add thought to. Even as I look at this, I'm looking at new ideas that I hadn't really extracted from my brain yet. And so I appreciate that. And someone in here is so organized, and that's amazing. So thank you. So let's go ahead and, sorry, let me get myself back up here. Okay. So now we're going to watch a short snippet. It's featuring Linda Darling Hammond, and it's on creating a collaborative classroom. As you watch this short video, I want you to consider the concept of meeting the needs of the whole child. So all parts of that child, and how that informs the way we support students. So we'll go ahead and play this.
The other piece that I think is critically important, in addition to preparing people to do this work in the classroom, is thinking about how we design schools so that they are developmentally healthy places. You can't just plunk this kind of work down in the middle of a school that is antithetical to good human relationships. Schools need to be places where strong relationships can form. That's not the environment we have in all schools. We are still struggling to get past the factory model school that we inherited in the early 1900s, which adopted age grading, so kids go to different teachers every year. In the middle and high schools, they go to different teachers, in many cases every 45 minutes. Teachers have 150 or 180 or 200 kids a day in this model. And much of the environment, particularly in big urban factory model schools, is punitive and coercive because it's about control of large numbers of people being asked to do things that are not natural. So we've got to redesign schools, and people are working on this to create smaller environments that are more personalized, where adults and kids stay together over periods of time, where teams of teachers can work with each other around the needs of the kids, as well as with the kids directly.
That idea of just the humanizing part of it, humanizing school spaces, humanizing our actions, humanizing our love and our care, and trying to take away that rote routine factory model and realize every child is different, every family is different, and every educator and staff member are different. And so bringing that human feel into it is critical. We know that it can be difficult to place relationships and practices. It can be difficult to put those in place at times, especially with the different policy changes and new practices each year and new initiatives. And I used to say, like, what's the big new thing, you know? But with all those things, we still have those humans that we need to hold at the center. And so it's important for us to consider how we're holding those little humans. And even at a teenager, they're still little humans. How are we holding them and supporting them with warmth and welcome as they're transitioning, both planned transitions and abrupt transitions? And before I introduce our amazing panelists, I just want to share a little personal story. My daughter experienced a transition at the end of school last year, an unexpected transition. She was facing immense racism at her school and bullying, and we had to end the school year two weeks early and, you know, go all virtual. And that was really huge. And, you know, with the work I do, I knew how to support her through some of that. But her teachers and the school really didn't know how to keep her engaged and keep her feeling like a part of the community. And so this idea of supporting the whole child and even supporting the learning environment that should support the whole child is really foundational and important to me. So I'm excited. This is the time where, you know, you all probably came to hear a little bit more about some experts that is going to share their knowledge and potentially lived experiences around this. And so I'd like to introduce our panelists, Ariel Brooks Porter and Jerica Coffey. I'd like to invite each of them, I'd like to invite each of you all to briefly introduce yourself. Share what draws you into this work and highlight some of your experiences with youth, particularly any experiences with youth and school transitions. And I'll ask you to keep your intros to about a minute so that we can hear more from you when the questions start to come. So let's start with Ariel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight to be a part of this panel. It's so important for us to be able to have these conversations and have them in such a community like this one. My name is Ariel Brooks Porter. I am a special educator by heart. It has been my passion for the last few years. I started in this work as a 7th grade inclusion English teacher. As you know, middle school is often sometimes, a rough area. We are going through different feelings, different emotions, and developmentally just learning who we are. However, middle school has always been um, my favorite area to support because I'm able to really be the person that I once needed as a child. My experience goes from special education and inclusion classes to supporting students in self contained spaces to becoming a special education coordinator and now a director of student services. And I've had the opportunity to see students come in from transitions from the summer, their transitions being from daycare to their first day at school, or being from home and being with their family their whole life and now coming to school for the first time. And I've had the opportunity to see students maneuver through their school experiences, whether it be students with disabilities, students who don't have English as their first language, and just regular general education students coming from tier one or Title I communities. My passion really stems from wanting to be who I needed as a child. I grew up in a low income community with a single parent, the youngest of 7 children, and in a community where we didn't have a lot. And a lot of the students who I serve also experience the same things that I once experienced. And I know that they need someone to see them, to hear them, and be there for them, advocating and cheering them on to the end. So I'm super excited to share more about my experience, share more about what I've done in my career thus far with you as we go through the panel tonight. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so much. All right, Jerica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Ariel, I'm very honored to be on this panel with you and with everyone here. Also very humbled to share my thoughts about this important consideration, especially at this time of the school year. So thank you for the invitation. I love MHTTC and all the programming that you do. It's so important. So I am a descendant granddaughter of braceros from Mexico who immigrated here during World War II, whose labor was stolen. I am the sister of 5 brothers and 1 sister. I'm also a mother of an amazing 12-year-old who's also my teacher. And I'm entering my 25th year in the field of education. Most of that tenure has been as a classroom teacher, but I stepped out for a time, and what I'm going to share today is really grounded in this period of my work to co-direct and build a program called Palante, a transformative justice program that was very much youth-led and rooted in the community and still thriving in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I currently teach in Oakland Unified School District, as well as at City College of San Francisco, where I work in teacher education. I just am really excited about this conversation and, the shared document. I feel like there's so much wisdom in this space. So I'm excited to also learn from all of you so that I can continue to grow my practice in direct service with young people.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so Ariel and Jerica, come into my living room. We're just going to chat a little bit about school, and you know how we do. We get in our little spaces and talk about what happened in the day with the kiddos, and that's what we're going to do today. And so, the first thought I have, or kind of wondering, is from your perspectives, what have you learned to be unique experiences and needs? What are those unique experiences, but also needs of young people navigating entry or re-entry after a traumatic experience? So after that traumatic experience is had, and you may know about it, but may not even have all the details, what are the experiences and needs that you feel those youth need? And either one of you are welcome to start. Ariel, I see you unmuted. Yeah.
I think that That's a great question, Melissa. And I want to start by saying often after the pandemic, we hear a lot about this word grace, right? I think prior to the pandemic, we hear it there here and there about giving people grace, but right after the pandemic, it's like we need to give everybody grace. And sometimes now it feels like such a loose term when we think about our students and we think about our peers, just in general. And when students are re-entering back into the school environment, especially after traumatic experiences that we often don't know enough about, they need grace. Um, we like to think like coming to school is your main job, and that's the only thing that you should be thinking about. But the truth is, a lot of our students in the environments they are in outside of school, they experience so many things that we can't even imagine. Um, and as adults, we think about how we react when we experience big traumatic events, right? And then we put that into perspective when we think about students who have not fully developed, who are still learning to maneuver their own emotions. And we have to put into perspective what it is that they truly need. They need the grace, they need support, and they really need someone who can listen to them, who can help them actually regulate their emotions and be able to process where they are so that they could effectively move forward. We can say that they need their academics and things of that nature, but truthfully, we can't give our students um, the opportunities without acknowledging where they are emotionally and giving them the tools to be able to kind of maneuver through that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that idea of the academic and that social emotional balance, because it is very important. The social emotional is, in my opinion, just as important as the academic, because it drives, the academics. And it's part of that whole child that we were talking about earlier. How are we developing this child as a whole human being, not a machine, but as a whole human being? Jerica, I'm wondering, Ariel mentioned grace. What other efforts do you think teachers and admin and staff, just really everyone, because everyone is responsible for that child, that youth, when we're in those spaces? That's what everyone. And so what are some efforts that they may take to foster these environments?
Yeah, thank you. Ariel, you got me thinking about something that I think about often, which is, the learnings of that period of shutdown during the pandemic, and how we all became more flexible. We offered grace, our systems changed, and we did such fundamental shifts in a short period of time, and we learned so much. And then, even the years that we came back, our institutions were, and we were oftentimes more flexible and sort of slowly getting students back. And then, in my experience, the institutions that I work for sort of went back to status quo. And, when we think about making it count, those were such hard years, and it really is a missed opportunity to not take that learning from those years. So I'm glad you started us off with that forward. And so, Melissa, this question of like, what else? I think my offering around this goes back, and I'm so glad that you started with Darling Hammond, because if we're not addressing the structures in our school and school design, when students are returning from a period of being gone, we can't be human in our response. And so I'll give you a small example of how that worked for me at the start of this school year. So I'm very lucky to work in a school, a full inclusion school, that has a mental health staff available for students. And so at the beginning of the school year, a student I'd work, we also do some looping. So I get to stay with students over many years. So that's a structure. That's a very humanizing structure. I can get to know them and their families. Um, so a student who I'd had last year didn't come to class 3 days into the week. I didn't know where she was. I hadn't heard from her, and I was wondering because some stuff had happened the year before that was very challenging. And so finally she shows up like third or fourth day of the first week of school. And I say, "Where are you? Where have you been?" And she said, "Well, they didn't tell you. They didn't tell you." And she had been being seen every day because her anxiety was so bad. And then no one told us. And then she returns to school like midday, third or fourth day into first week. And there was just this gap in communication that could have allowed for a more supportive reentry. And so while my school has a lot of things in place to foster relationships like looping and like smaller integrated communities where students share the same teachers, so we're on a weekly basis talking about students and how we're supporting them and sharing best practices, we still had this other thing happen that made it very difficult for me to support her transition back. And she had missed so many hours of instruction. You know, her anxiety was sort of, it was like snowballing. So I offer that in terms of what else we can do, because I think we can have this conversation on the surface of practices, but if we're not addressing the structural conditions that make being humanized in our responses difficult, then we're always going to feel like, or this is in my experience, it's a lot of chasing our tails, right? And not really providing everything that we can provide for young people when they're returning from a period, that where they're not in school. So I just wanted to offer that, and I'm so glad that you started us off with that because it's a very important consideration as we think about how to do this and how to do this well. We have to set up educators and mental health staff in ways that allows them to be integrated in the way that we support young people.
Can I add?
Oh, yes, please.
I love what you just shared, Jerica, because when we think about the whole child, we think about really supporting a student. You said this student has been out and having anxiety. It made me immediately think about the resources at school that could have supported her reentry, that could have stopped possibly her not being able to come to school the first 2 or 3 days, right? Like we have the resources here. If you or the team could have known, it could have supported her reentry sooner so that she could feel more confident and feel less anxious about her school day or things of that nature. And when we think about that full child, we think about like the services that we have in place at school so that we can connect them where they are at home. And so I just wanted to add that because, yeah, so important.
Yeah. And I feel like the other thing that you made me think about, Ariel, at the beginning is just how we have to really be intersectional in the way that we're seeing young people because they're not just experiencing the missing school and not being a part of the community. They are also experiencing whatever else is going on in their lives. And so the ways that we are sometimes asking students to leave that at the door, we really need to interrupt that, right? And to make sure that students have space, connection, and support to be able to be their full authentic selves at school. And schools are like these rigid institutions. So going back to like what we learned from the pandemic, we can be flexible. We can individualize. It's just, do we have the will, and are we building the capacity?
And that's so real because when we think about that intersectionality, we look at the data, right? We look at the data and we see like students' reading scores have been lower after the pandemic. And we see all of these things, but then we only attribute it to school. And it's like, no, when they leave us, they go home into environments where they live in food deserts. They're not having access to nutrition. We're not having access to um, grocery stores. Like, all of these things are also impacting students outside of the buildings. And sometimes our school buildings are in communities, but aren't in community with the organizations that our students experience on a regular basis. And so when we think about supporting students and providing spaces in which they can truly bloom and blossom and feel successful, will feel seen and known, sometimes that's stepping outside of our school doors and actually creating relationships with the Boys and Girls Club down the street, or understanding what it looks like to collaborate with the food banks to ensure that our families are receiving what they need to actually be successful inside and outside of the school. It's not just the academic aspect, because we know that our students are experiencing death and grief and homelessness and eviction and like going between households and all of these things. And sometimes we get so hyper focused on like what it is we're doing inside these walls, but education started as something that was communal, right? We talked about how it takes a village, and that village included the school and the dream team and the parents, and we would go to the Boys and Girls Club and we would have these connections. And sometimes it feels like that piece is what's lost when we think about our whole children, when we think about creating spaces that allow them to thrive. And when I think about the efforts that our schools could bring, it's that. It's like, how can we connect to the community our students are in to ensure that we are continuing to push that growth in ways that are not just academic, because we know to create spaces where our students are matriculating and becoming the next presidents and the next doctors and neurosurgeons, that their whole environment, their entire environment, where they go home to, where everything that they experience plays a part in who they become. So how can we actually create a system and a community where we have a hand in everything that supports our babies?
That's so important from what both of you all shared, and what keeps resonating with me based on what both of you shared is the intentionality. How are we intentionally in addressing these needs and concerns? How are we intentionally embedding the practices and policies and procedures, into the environments? And so I'm wondering, thinking about if we're being intentional, there are the adults in those school learning environments that would need to build capacity around how do we support, children and youth in this? And so, thinking about all the different, as we mentioned before, we kind of listed those out, but thinking about all the different adults and even community members, all the different people that those students come in contact with, even thinking about the diversity of the actual staff members and new teachers versus longtime employees versus some teachers already implementing and staff members implementing these practices versus those that are not yet ready to fully engage. How do we build capacity? How do we build that capacity that would really address that structural or institutional issue? Jerica, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Well, I think so. Great work is being done everywhere, right? And so I think we build capacity through sharing and through if it's like taking your leadership team to visit the school that's in the district that is doing that thing well, go visit, do that. If it's across the country, get them, try to find the money to take your team, because great work is being done everywhere. And there's so much knowledge. I mean, Ariel's pointing to how there's so much knowledge and capacity, even in the community, that can hold the work that we're doing. So that's one thing. I think also, there is a way, I wanted to speak to this at some point. So this seems like it might be a good point to do this. There's a lot of mental health practitioners here. I can see people's, little introductions. bios that they're putting in the chat. And I think one of the offerings I want to share is that so I mentioned I work at a full inclusion high school, and it's a smaller, it's actually a high school, a 612, and it's broken into smaller sort of learning communities. And there's times when we're whole staff and times when we're working in our smaller communities where people meet once a week to talk about young people and strategize. So there's time built in our schedule for that. And then we share, there's like a master scheduler. She's incredible. And she like makes sure that students have the same cohorts of teachers. And it's a complex work, but those kinds of things, those structural things make a huge difference because they allow us to build capacity where there's experienced teachers working in the space with novice teachers, and there's mental health practitioners in that space as well. And I think that some of the most powerful collaborations I've had is when mental health practitioners are integrated into the school communities. They're collaborating with us to develop curriculum that is humanizing, that is trauma informed, that's healing centered in our pedagogy, in our curriculum. They're teaching us because mental health providers have this whole other way of understanding human development that we don't get in our credential programs as classroom practitioners. And so in the same way we want to be like responsive to the whole child, we also need to be integrated, right, as communities in the way that we're building capacity. And that is a question of what structures are in place, right? Because what I want to argue is that we can move beyond, and I've seen it. The program I talked about, Palante, which I'm going to put the website in the chat because they're still going strong. I started that with a social worker, and that was such a powerful collaboration. We started in a high school teaching young people restorative justice practices. During the day, they were doing circle work and one of our most successful practices was a reentry circle that was youth-led that brought together stakeholders to create a community space for young people to say, this is what I need, this is what's gone on, this is what I need, and then for all of us to make a commitment for how we were going to support that young person. And we would circle up regularly in order to find a path forward rooted in what the young person and people closest to them said that they needed. And that work, again, was a collaboration between a mental health practitioner and a classroom teacher. And so I think that it is possible to move beyond like, a little check-in at a meeting and to really imagine what kind of programs, what kind of pedagogy and teaching and curriculum can a mental health practitioner and a teacher create? Because it's not enough for students to be pulled out of our classroom and go to therapy, then they come back and we don't know what's going on. As a classroom teacher, it happens all the time, right? So I just want to offer that as a call to really thinking about for this year, is there a teacher on a campus that you work in that would be open to being the model, right? To working with you and you starting a collaboration that maybe you present on, you do the work throughout the year, and then maybe you present on it at the end of the year, and then it grows from there. And then check out Palante because they're doing the work, and I think it's an important model for what's possible to support young people in a number of different ways.
And what I could hear coming from that is that intentionality and the systemic work, the foundational work that is necessary. Some things from the chat, collaboration, disciplinary learning. I read a lot about partnership and relationship. And so comprehensive, integrated. And we say the whole child, and then so our practices need to be supportive of that whole child, all of the ways that they experience school. Ariel, anything you want to offer to that you're kind of thinking about, and any practices that you've encountered that may help build capacity with educators?
I think what you shared was so spot on, Jerica. And My thoughts were more, I think what we need to be sure of is that when we enter this space, to ensure that we're creating the collaboration, because I 100% agree with you. We need to have our mental health practitioners inside the classroom supporting with social emotional learning so our students can actually have the best of both worlds throughout their entire day and not just a portion of their day. As a director of student services and supporting students with IEPs and things of that nature and disabilities and supporting families to better understand what that looks like, I want to share that I remember being younger and having students in my school who had disabilities, and they'd be pulled out to a self-contained space, and everyone just remembers special ed being a room at the end of the hall where the students in that space stayed there all day and they were special ed, and it had such a negative connotation. When I think about this work now, my goal is to debunk the stereotypes and the myths when it comes to special education, because I truly believe that all education is special education. When we really care about our kids, when we really care about their ability to grow, we individualize the work to ensure that they have access to rigorous curriculum to ensure that they can be who we know that they can be. And that begins with understanding our own personal mindsets, our own personal biases, and being able to truly break down this large jargon and vernacular and actually say what it is without actually trying to be too fluffy, right?
Mhm.
The families that I work with on a regular basis, we're scared of special ed. We are afraid of extra support. We are afraid of having a mental health practitioner tell me anything or say that my kid needs anything. And in turn, because of these fears, because of these stereotypes, and because of these biases, we're unable to actually provide our students with the support they need to strive and thrive and be successful in the end. I see it time and time again, parents who have a hard time identifying their students in elementary, because it's like, I don't want this label or X, Y, and Z. And we have to actually get to a space where we're debunking the myth and understanding that our staff, our team, has to do some of their own personal work. And that's okay. That's okay. Because we live in a society right now that doesn't necessarily show inclusivity everywhere we go, right? We go to some stores and we see that they don't have access for people who may be deaf or people who are blind, right? Like, how are we providing that accessibility everywhere? Well, the truth is that work starts in our schools. When we can be truly inclusive for everybody in our spaces, when we can shift our mindset to actually do what's necessary for our individual students to support their whole childrenness, then we can actually create societies that are inclusive for all students. We can actually ensure that our classrooms are socially, emotionally sound, ensuring that students can grow. I can be doing my math lesson and you can tell me that I'm resilient because it's hard and I keep going and my social emotional awareness is there and you're helping me get through this frustrate. Like, all of it becomes intertwined, but we have to truly allow ourselves to sit down and reflect and do some introspection to truly see where we are in our mindsets so we can make those shifts. We know that the education here is just stuck. It's stuck. We've been, the world has evolved. We're no longer using typewriters. We got cell phones and Macs, and education is still thriving on the same plane, right? We have to really like take these things that we know to be true about our whole bodies and all the things that we need to be successful and actually integrate them, like Jerica said, in our classrooms. Because when we can shift our mindset and collaborate with mental health practitioners, speech pathologists, if I could have a speech pathologist in my foundations lesson today to tell me how I should actually say this sound, maybe I don't have to over identify kids for speech, right? Like, there are a number of ways that we could use our service providers that doesn't have to lead to special education, but our mindsets have to shift to understand that education is special and everybody
Mhm.
deserves accommodations and access to the rigor and supports in the classroom.
Yes, education is special and it's unique for everyone. What would a world look like in education where those small groups you mentioned, every child's in a small group multiple times throughout the day in multiple spaces and places and ways. And so that that isn't this nuanced place that they go to that other them, and especially historically marginalized students that already are othered in their lives and in society. Now we have this additional context that others them. But what would it look like if we're personalized learning and individualized learning so that students are in these groups and they're all unique and we're really tailoring, our approaches to the unique needs of the students. So I do have one more thought, one more question, and then we're going to kind of open it up for our participants to share. But we've mentioned strengths and we mentioned, the uniqueness of the youth. And so I love to think about a strengths-based approach when I'm tackling challenges. What are the unique strengths that the youth have? What are the unique strengths they're bringing back to us? Because it's not just us pouring into them, they're entering back into our worlds as well. And so what are some of the unique strengths that you've come to find or hear about that they're sharing back with us as they enter or re-enter back into the space?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the if we are relational in the work, if the relationships are the center of everything, then we'll be able to see that, right? And young people and children will show us what their gifts and their strengths are. But in particular for children who experience absences from school because of medical issues, because of mental health challenges, because of incarceration, all the things that come up. Oftentimes, while the challenge in my experience, for those students, there's compound challenges going on. Almost always, it's never one thing; it's many things, and the resilience is incredible. That even while navigating all of that, they're showing up in whatever way they can, and they're entering a space that has like a train that's been going, and they're stepping onto that train, not always having been given the right equipment to enter that space, and or support, and that they're still there, and trying is an incredible strength. And I think it's so important to always acknowledge that, and to make the time, if we're thinking about practices, to really make the time to listen to students, to have the practices and the structure in place so that regular check-ins can happen, so that they can show you, right? Young people will show you their gifts, but only if they know that they are safe to do so, that who they are and what they're going through is being seen. And we will not know their strengths if they can't bring it all with them, right? If we're saying, oh, the classroom's all that at the door,
Mhm.
classroom is for this, and we're not really bearing witness to what they're going through. And because in my experience, when young people have experienced a death in the family, for example, one of the things that can come up, and they're gone for weeks and they come back and no one's asking them how they feel, and no one's asking them, about what they're going through, and what they need. It's just business as usual. We're telling them that they don't matter, and I'm not, it's very difficult to be a classroom teacher and do all those things without the structures to support you. But I just want to name that that's oftentimes young people's experiences. And we can't get to their strengths if they're feeling unsafe and they have to put their psychic armor on to be able to survive in the space. They just won't show up in the same way, but they're always going to be bringing their resilience. And if their psychic armor is the tool, then that's the strength, because they're surviving an institution that's not responding to their needs.
Ariel and Jerica, I'll bring you back up. And a question we have here is, what's a good first step for those who may be in the system that are resilient, that are resistant? So students that are resistant to some of the ideas and thoughts that you shared, and maybe not even students, maybe, adults, what's a good initial step for people that are resistant to doing some of the things that you mentioned?
When I think about this resistance, I think about vulnerability. A lot of times, the resistance comes from a space of not feeling comfortable to be vulnerable. And so we have to lead with our own vulnerability in these spaces. I'll share a similar story for you, Mr. Foster. Last year, I had a staff who I felt needed a true mindset shift. There were things that I felt could be better for my students. And I also recognized that, hey, we're in the middle of the year, burnout is real. Maybe we're getting to a point where we're like on our wits' end. We came to the table and created a Mindset Matters PD, and we actually had to sit and have a conversation about where our mindsets were. Now, I knew a lot of my staff was going to be resistant, but I really had to take myself and use me as an example. So I started by sharing a lot of the times we have a parent where we feel like they don't care about their kids. They're doing X, Y, and Z. They don't care about their kid. They just sit in the school. They don't care X, Y, and Z. They do this at home. The kids X, Y, and Z. And I had to step back myself. This is a story I shared with my staff. Well, this parent is going to school. She's a single parent. She doesn't have much help. Not a lot of family at home. I need to shift my mindset because actually she's doing everything that she can outside of the school to support her baby. And even if I don't think it's enough, I had to really sit and pull these things out. She comes to school every day after school to pick her child up, to go to work, and then go to class, and then do it all over again. And I really had to set myself up to say, I had a fixed mindset on what I'm seeing our parents do. And I need to shift that so that I could actually be a supporting player in helping them to do what is necessary outside of the school building so that our partnership can blossom in support of this student. We really have to allow ourselves to be the first, right? We got to be the first to show that emotion and be vulnerable for our staff to actually get that buy-in, because they need to be able to see how the passion runs for us. Sometimes it just feels like, yeah, you're just saying this because this is what's popular. The pandemic came and everybody's like, yay, DEI, yay, DEI. We're all just going to throw DEI at the wall. But why is this personal to our school mission? Why is this personal to you? And why do we as the staff need to care enough to join you on this fight?
What you're saying makes me think about the 6 conditions of systems change and collective impact, and that what holds all that is that mental models. The mental models is what holds all of that together. So even before we can understand the practices and the policies and all those other layers, the resources and all those layers, we have to understand who we are and how we're showing up and how are we thinking, because that is directly impacting the decisions we make with our students and with ourselves. I could talk to you all day, and I really wish I could, but I'd like to wrap up. If you want to share just kind of a 30-second any takeaway that you'd like us to leave with as we go back into these spaces that we're going to occupy and support with students. Jerica, I'll start with you.
Oh, okay, that's a tall order. I'm sorry, I'm so long-winded. So I just, again, I'll just come back to like this idea of collaboration and being integrated in our approach, being grounded in a sense of purpose. And some people are just starting back to the school year. I think giving teachers time to really connect with a sense of purpose, writing about it, sharing it, in your professional development spaces. And then the last thing I want to offer, just connected to the previous question, is just if you have resistant people, do a student panel, have a survey, ask students, do they feel supported? Who's supporting them? Ask them
Mhm.
about their experiences and show people the data, because the non-believers they're gonna see, 60 students said this or that. And then students are really teaching you what they need. And you're not making up the data. You're not, it's not because it's a trend. Students are actually saying this space feels whatever way, and then you're problem solving around that. And then a lot of times non-believers will come over. But I do agree with Ariel that we need to lead by example and embody the practices ourselves. So I want to encourage you, last words, mental health providers, find an awesome teacher to collaborate and do some integrated work this year.
Thank you. Thank you. Ariel, any last thoughts last thoughts of wisdom you can share with us?
My last thoughts are just that there are always going to be people who are uncertain about the work that we do, but that's why we do this work. We believe and trust and know that our students can be successful. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of good trouble and advocacy for what our students need. And I know that this call is filled with educators who are charged to fight the good fight and get in the good trouble to ensure that the students you serve have access to what they need to be successful. So tap into those mental health professionals at your school. If your school's not doing it, that's not going to stop you from asking the social worker if they could support. Do what you can do to make the change necessary for the students that you serve. And I promise it's going to make life-changing moves for your kids. Thank you guys so much for having us tonight on this
Can
panel.
we give a shout out to our wonderful panelists for dropping knowledge and wisdom and just a sense of warmth and love?
Thank you so much. What a powerful conversation. My heart and my mind are definitely bubbling with ideas and desire to be in the conversation further. And that's a good thing. So if you're feeling similarly, really invite you to carry what it is you're hearing and feeling in today's panel conversation to someone in your life somewhere, so that you can keep this kind of going and growing. There are 2 more sessions, so this is a little comma, not a period.